The words hit her like a slap across the face. Then maybe you should have thought twice before booking a seat you clearly can't afford to be in. Lena Monroe stood frozen in the aisle of Flight 447, her 6-month-old son pressed against her chest, tears burning behind her eyes as every passenger in the cabin turned to stare. The flight attendant stood over her, arms crossed, smirking with the kind of cruelty that comes from believing you're untouchable. Lena reached for her diaper bag with trembling hands, defeated, humiliated, ready to do what she'd been told, leave. But then a voice shattered the silence. "Mrs. Sinclair?" Captain Morrison appeared in the aisle, his face drained of all color, phone pressed to his ear, his voice shaking with something that looked like pure terror. "Mrs. Sinclair, your husband is on the line." The flight attendant froze. Her smirk faltered. And Lena Monroe realized something in that moment. This flight attendant had no idea who she just humiliated. No idea what was about to happen next. And no idea that her entire world was about to come crashing down. Welcome to Mr. Harrington's Stories, where love, power, and justice collide in ways you'll never forget. Before we dive deeper into what happens next, I want to leave you with this blessing. May your week be filled with unexpected grace, and may you never be judged by those who know nothing of your journey. If you're here with us right now, type present in the comments. Let's build this community together. And if you believe that people should be treated with dignity no matter how they look or what they wear, hit that subscribe button. Because the trolls won't. But you? You're better than that. Now, let me take you back to where this all began. 3 days before that flight, before the humiliation, before the reckoning, Lena Monroe sat on the floor of her Manhattan penthouse with her son in her lap and laughter spilling from her lips like sunlight through clouds. Elijah reached for her face with tiny, curious fingers, and she let him, smiling as he grabbed at her nose, her cheeks, her hair. The apartment around them was breathtaking, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, marble countertops that gleamed like ice, furniture that cost more than most people's cars. But Lena had transformed it into something else, something warm. Photos of her family in Atlanta lined the shelves. A framed picture of her late father sat on the mantel, his smile frozen in time, watching over her. This was her home, not because of the luxury, but because she had filled it with love. The sound of the door opening pulled her attention. Alexander Sinclair walked in, tall and commanding, his sharp jaw set in that way that made boardrooms fall silent. His silver-blue eyes softened the moment they landed on her and Elijah. He was still in his suit, tailored perfectly to his frame, fresh from a meeting where he'd likely moved millions with a single signature. But here, kneeling beside his wife and son, he was just a man trying to hold onto the only things that mattered. "You're still planning to fly commercial tomorrow?" Lena smiled, that quiet, knowing smile she always gave him when she'd already made up her mind. "Alex, we've been over this. I want to see my mom. I don't need a private jet for a 2-hour flight." He shook his head, frustration and admiration warring in his expression. "You're my wife. You're carrying our son. Let me send the plane." She reached up, cupping his face in her hands, her touch gentle but firm. "I love you. But I need to do this my way." Alexander sighed, the sound heavy with defeat, but there was something else there too, respect. "You're the only person who's ever said no to me. And that's why you married me." He kissed her forehead, lingering there for a moment as if memorizing the feel of her skin. Damn right. But later that night, when Lena had gone to bed and the penthouse had fallen into silence, Alexander sat at his desk, surrounded by reports and spreadsheets and the weight of an empire he'd built from nothing. His assistant, Margaret, entered quietly. She was a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and sharper instincts, the kind of person who knew things before they became problems. "Sir, there's been a pattern of complaints about passenger treatment on Flight 447, the Atlanta route." Alexander looked up, his eyes narrowing. "What kind of complaints?" "Discrimination. Mainly toward black passengers. Subtle, but consistent. One flight attendant in particular, Jessica Hartley." His jaw tightened, the muscles in his face hardening into something cold and dangerous. Why wasn't she terminated? Margaret hesitated, choosing her words carefully. Her uncle is on the board of Skylink Partners. She's protected. Alexander's eyes darkened, the kind of darkness that came before storms. No one is protected in my company if they're hurting people. Document everything. I'll handle it when I'm back. Margaret shifted on her feet, and Alexander knew immediately that there was more. Sir, Mrs. Sinclair is flying that route tomorrow. The room went still. Alexander stared at the report in his hands, the words blurring as a bad feeling settled deep in his chest, heavy and cold like a stone dropped into water. She insisted on going alone, Margaret added, her voice soft, cautious. Alexander said nothing, but his mind was already racing, already calculating, already preparing for something he couldn't name but could feel coming like thunder in the distance. The next morning, Lena boarded Flight 447 with Elijah strapped to her chest in a soft carrier. She moved through the airport with the ease of someone who had nothing to prove, her natural hair pulled back, her face free of makeup, her clothing simple and comfortable. She was calm, confident, unbothered by the stares that followed her, the quick glances, the assumptions people made without saying a word. But Jessica Hartley noticed her the moment she stepped onto the plane. The senior flight attendant stood near the front, her uniform pressed and perfect, her smile practiced and empty. She whispered to another attendant, Brooke, a younger woman who looked uncomfortable even as the words left Jessica's mouth. Another one. Coach passenger trying to look like she belongs. Brooke shifted, glancing at Lena, then back at Jessica. Jessica, she's just holding a baby. She's making a scene before we've even taken off. Lena found her seat, 12C, and settled in, adjusting Elijah against her chest. He was fussing, the way babies do when they're tired or overwhelmed or just need their mother's warmth. She rocked him gently, humming a soft melody, her voice low and soothing. Around her, passengers took their seats, stowed their bags, checked their phones. Normal. Routine. Unremarkable. But Jessica was already moving toward her, her smile cold and sharp as glass. Ma'am, is there a problem? Lena looked up, surprised by the question. No, he's just a little tired. Well, this is a full flight. If he's going to be disruptive, we'll need to make other arrangements. Lena blinked, confusion flickering across her face. Other arrangements? Perhaps a later flight. Or a different airline altogether. The words landed like a slap, and Lena felt the air shift around her. She tried to keep her voice steady, tried to keep the hurt from showing. I'm sorry if he's bothering anyone, but he's just a baby. He'll settle down. Jessica's voice dropped, icy and deliberate, each word carefully chosen to cut. Ma'am, passengers in this section expect a certain standard. If you can't meet it, perhaps you should reconsider your choices. The implication hung in the air, ugly and unmistakable. An older white woman in first class leaned over her seat, peering back toward economy. Is there a problem back there? Jessica straightened, her voice instantly warmer, accommodating. Just managing expectations, ma'am. Lena felt the heat of shame crawl up her neck, burning her cheeks, tightening her throat. Other passengers were watching now. Some pretended not to notice, burying their faces in magazines or phones. Others stared openly. A few pulled out their phones, recording, capturing her humiliation for the world to see. She stood, her hands trembling as she reached for the diaper bag beneath the seat. Her voice cracked when she spoke. I'll move. I'm sorry. And that's when everything changed. Mrs. Sinclair? Captain Morrison appeared in the aisle, his face drained of color, his phone still pressed to his ear. His voice shook, barely controlled, as if the words themselves were dangerous. Jessica's face went blank, confusion replacing the smirk. I am sorry, who? The captain didn't look at her. His eyes were locked on Lena, and when he spoke again, his voice carried through the cabin like a verdict. Mrs. Lena Sinclair, wife of Alexander Sinclair. CEO and sole owner of Sinclair Aviation Group. Jessica's knees buckled. The color drained from her face. Around them, passengers gasped, whispered, reached for their phones again, but this time to search, to confirm, to understand what they were witnessing. Lena took the phone from the captain, her voice soft, steady despite everything. "Alex?" His voice came through, calm but laced with a fury that made the air feel electric. "Are you okay?" She glanced at Jessica, whose face had gone ashen, whose hands were shaking, whose perfect world had just shattered into 1,000 unrepairable pieces. "I'm fine now." "Good. Don't move. I'm handling this." And in that moment, as the cabin fell into stunned silence, as Jessica realized the magnitude of her mistake, as passengers scrambled to delete their videos or share them or simply stare in disbelief, one thing became perfectly clear. This flight attendant had humiliated the wrong woman. And nothing was ever going to be the same again. Would you have kept your composure, or would you have said something? Let me know below. Captain Morrison moved through the cabin with the kind of urgency that made every head turn, every whisper stop mid-sentence. He gestured toward first class, his hand trembling slightly as he spoke to Lena, his voice now respectful, almost reverent. "Mrs. Sinclair, please allow me to escort you. We have a much more comfortable seat for you and your son." Lena stood slowly, Elijah still pressed against her chest, and followed the captain down the aisle. Every eye tracked her movement. Phones were raised, cameras recording, capturing this moment that had shifted from humiliation to something else entirely: vindication, reckoning, justice. The whispers swirled around her like wind through trees. "Did you hear? That's the owner's wife. She owns this airline. Jessica's done. She's finished." In the galley, Jessica Hartley stood frozen, her back pressed against the counter as if it were the only thing holding her upright. Her hands shook. Her breath came in short, shallow gasps. Brooke stood beside her, her voice barely above a whisper but heavy with truth. "Jessica, you just insulted the owner's wife." Jessica's voice cracked, desperation bleeding through every syllable. "I didn't know. How was I supposed to?" Brooke cut her off, her tone sharp but sad, as if mourning something already lost. "You weren't supposed to treat anyone like that." The words hung between them, undeniable and damning. Jessica opened her mouth to respond, but no sound came. What could she say? What defense existed for cruelty? What excuse could justify what the entire cabin had witnessed? In first class, Lena sank into the plush leather seat the captain offered, the best on the plane, positioned by the window where she could see the clouds and sky and forget, for just a moment, the shame that still burned in her chest. Captain Morrison handed her back the phone, his eyes apologetic, his posture deferential in a way it hadn't been minutes before. On the other end, Alexander's voice was ice-wrapped in fury, cold and controlled but lethal beneath the surface. "Captain Morrison, I want a full report. Every word that was said. Every complaint filed. And I want that attendant's employment file on my desk before we land." "Yes, sir." The captain's response was immediate, absolute. Lena closed her eyes, holding Elijah close, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing against her chest. She didn't want this. She never wanted to be that woman, the one who wielded her husband's name like a sword, who used power to crush others, who became the very thing she despised. But Jessica hadn't given her a choice. Jessica had made assumptions, cast judgments, issued cruelty without knowing, without caring, who was on the receiving end. And now, Jessica would pay the price. The flight attendant appeared at the edge of first class 20 minutes later, her face pale and streaked with tears, her hands wringing together as if trying to hold onto something already slipping away. Her voice shook when she spoke, each word trembling with desperation. "Mrs. Sinclair, I didn't realize who you were. I'm so sorry. If I had known." Lena looked up, and her eyes were steady clear, holding none of the tears that had been there before. "If you had known, you would have treated me differently. But you shouldn't have to know who someone is to treat them with respect." Jessica faltered, her carefully constructed apology crumbling. "I was just doing my job." "No." Lena's voice was quiet but firm, cutting through the excuse like a blade through paper. "You were doing what you've probably done 100 times before. To people who didn't have my husband's name to protect them." The truth of it hit Jessica like a physical blow. Her face crumbled, tears spilling freely now, her voice breaking. "Please. I need this job. My uncle. Your uncle can't save you from this." Jessica stumbled backward, her legs unsteady, her world collapsing around her in real time. She turned and fled back to the galley, leaving Lena alone with Elijah and the weight of what had just happened. Across the ocean, in a glass-walled office overlooking the grey expanse of London, Alexander Sinclair paced like a caged lion. His suit jacket was discarded, his tie loosened, his shirt sleeves rolled up as if preparing for battle. Margaret entered quietly, a tablet in her hands, her expression grim. "Sir, the video is already circulating." Passengers filmed the entire encounter. Alexander stopped pacing, his jaw clenching as Margaret handed him the tablet. He watched the footage in silence. Jessica's cruel words, the implication dripping from every syllable, Lena's face as the shame washed over her, the moment she stood to leave, defeated and humiliated. His hand tightened around the tablet, knuckles white, fury radiating from him in waves, so intense Margaret took an involuntary step back. "Get me Skylink's board. Now." Margaret hesitated. "Sir, Jessica's uncle." "I don't care who her uncle is." Alexander's voice was deadly calm, the kind of calm that preceded destruction. "She discriminated against a passenger. She humiliated my wife. She's done." Margaret nodded, already pulling out her phone. "And the media? Let them run it. I want the world to see exactly what happened." He picked up his own phone, his fingers moving quickly across the screen as he typed a message to Lena. "I'm coming home. I love you. And I'm going to make this right." He hit send, then stood at the window, staring out at the city below, already calculating his next moves, already preparing to dismantle the protections that had allowed someone like Jessica Hartley to thrive. By the time Flight 447 touched down in Atlanta, the video had exploded across the internet like wildfire. Hashtags trended worldwide, hashtag Jessica Hartley, hashtag Sinclair Airlines, hashtag Justice for Lena. News outlets scrambled to cover the story, their headlines bold and unforgiving. "Flight attendant caught discriminating against black mother. Turns out she's a billionaire's wife." The footage played on loop, dissected frame by frame, analyzed and debated and shared millions of times over. Social media erupted in a frenzy of opinions, hot takes, and righteous anger. "This is why we can't have nice things," one user wrote. "Jessica really thought she could bully someone and get away with it," another commented. Lena Sinclair handled that with so much grace, a third chimed in, their words accompanied by heart emojis and praise. But not all the comments were kind. "She only got respect because of her husband's money," someone sneered. "What about the women who don't have billionaires to protect them?" Another asked, the question sharp and pointed, cutting to the heart of something deeper, something uncomfortable. Lena read the comments in the back of a hired car, her phone screen glowing in the dim light as Atlanta's streets blurred past the window. Elijah slept peacefully in his car seat beside her, oblivious to the storm his mother had become the center of. Each comment landed differently. Some filled her with warmth, others with guilt, still others with a creeping sense of dread. She didn't want to be a symbol. She didn't want to be a headline. She just wanted to visit her mom. The car pulled up to a modest house in a quiet Atlanta neighborhood, the kind of place where porches held rocking chairs and yards held memories. It was warm and lived in and filled with the kind of love that money couldn't buy. Gloria Monroe opened the door before Lena could even knock, her arms already outstretched, her face etched with concern and fierce maternal protection. "Baby, I saw the video. Are you okay?" And that's when Lena broke. All the composure she'd maintained on the plane, all the strength she'd shown in front of Jessica, all the dignity she'd clung to as the cabin watched her humiliation, it shattered. She collapsed into her mother's arms, sobs tearing from her chest, raw and uncontrollable. Elijah stirred in the carrier but didn't wake, and Gloria pulled them both inside, holding her daughter the way she had when Lena was a child, when scraped knees and hurt feelings were the worst things in the world. "Mama, I didn't want this. I didn't want to be that person. But she treated me like I was nothing. Like Elijah, and I didn't deserve to be there." Gloria stroked her hair, her voice steady and soothing. "You didn't do anything wrong, baby. You stood up for yourself. And for every other woman who's been treated that way. But they're saying I only got respect because of Alex. And they're wrong." Gloria pulled back, cupping Lena's face in her hands, forcing her daughter to meet her eyes. "You got respect because you demanded it. You're not just Alexander Sinclair's wife. You're Lena Monroe. And you've always been enough." Lena wanted to believe her. She wanted those words to erase the shame, to quiet the voices in her head that whispered she was only safe because of her husband's name, his money, his power. But the doubt lingered, heavy and suffocating. That night, after Elijah had been fed and bathed and put to bed in the room that used to be hers, after Gloria had made tea and they'd sat in the kitchen talking about everything and nothing, Lena's phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but something compelled her to answer. "Hello?" A woman's voice came through, shaky and desperate, the sound of someone barely holding themselves together. "Mrs. Sinclair? My name is Tasha Williams. I was on a Sinclair Airlines flight 6 months ago. I was treated the same way you were." Lena's breath caught in her throat. "But I didn't have anyone to protect me." Tasha's voice broke, pain bleeding through every word. "I lost my job because I missed my interview. I lost my apartment. I lost everything." The silence stretched between them, heavy with shared trauma, with recognition, with the weight of injustice that had been allowed to fester for far too long. "I need your help," Tasha continued, her voice gaining strength. "Because if this happened to you, if they treated you like that knowing you're married to the man who owns the airline, then it's been happening to people like us for years. And no one's been listening." Lena closed her eyes, her hand gripping the phone so tightly her knuckles went white. In that moment, sitting in her mother's kitchen with the taste of tea still on her tongue and her son sleeping peacefully upstairs, she realized something that changed everything. This wasn't just about Jessica anymore. This wasn't about one flight attendant's cruelty or one moment of humiliation caught on camera. This was about a system that had failed countless women, countless mothers, countless passengers who didn't have the protection of a powerful name. This was about all the Tashas out there who had suffered in silence, while people like Jessica operated with impunity. And Lena Monroe Sinclair had a choice to make. Do you think Lena should fight for justice for others, or let it go? Drop your thoughts. Alexander Sinclair's private jet touched down in New York 36 hours after that phone call, after watching the video loop endlessly in his mind, after barely sleeping, after making calls that would reshape his entire company. He walked into their penthouse with purpose, his jaw set, his eyes dark with a kind of fury that had built empires and destroyed those who stood in his way. But Lena was waiting. And she wasn't the woman he'd left behind. She stood by the window overlooking the city, backlit by the late afternoon sun, and when she turned to face him, he saw something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Not fear. Not relief. Something harder. Stronger. Forged in the fire of humiliation and reborn as determination. "Alex, I need you to listen to me." He nodded, crossing the room to her, ready to promise her anything, ready to burn the world down if that's what she needed. "This isn't just about Jessica. It's not just about me." Lena's voice was steady, each word deliberate and unshakable. "There are dozens of complaints buried in your company's files. People who were treated the way I was, but they didn't have your name to protect them. They suffered in silence." Alexander's face hardened, his hands clenching at his sides. "I'll fix it." "No." The word cut through the air like a blade, sharp and final. "We'll fix it. Together. I'm not just your wife. I'm not just a victim. I want to help you rebuild this company into something that actually protects people." Alexander stared at her, and in that moment, standing in the golden light of their home with fire burning in her eyes and steel in her voice, he fell in love with her all over again. Not because she needed him, but because she didn't. Because she had transformed her pain into purpose, her humiliation into power. Because she was everything he'd always known she was, and more than he'd ever imagined she could become. He pulled her close, pressing his forehead against hers. "Then let's get to work." 2 days later, Alexander convened an emergency board meeting in the sleek glass conference room at Sinclair Aviation Group headquarters. The room was designed to intimidate: floor-to-ceiling windows, a table that stretched like a runway, leather chairs that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Richard Hartley sat near the center, Jessica's uncle, smug and confident, his tie perfectly knotted, his smile easy. He'd weathered storms before. He'd protected his family before. This would be no different. Then Alexander walked in. And Lena was at his side. The room fell silent, every conversation dying mid-sentence, every eye turning toward the couple who entered not as husband and wife but as a unified force. Alexander moved to the head of the table, his presence commanding absolute attention. Lena stood beside him, her posture regal, her expression calm but unyielding. "Gentlemen," Alexander began, his voice cold and measured, "we have a problem. And it ends today." He pressed a button on the remote in his hand. The screens lining the walls flickered to life, displaying the video that had gone viral: Jessica's cruel words, Lena's humiliation, the moment that had sparked a global conversation. Then came slides. Complaint after complaint. Names redacted but stories preserved. Black passengers. Hispanic passengers. Passengers who didn't fit some arbitrary standard of what belonged in first class, in business class, in the air at all. Richard shifted in his seat, his smile fading. "Alex, Jessica made a mistake, but she didn't make a mistake." Lena's voice cut through his excuse, calm but devastating. "She made a choice. And your company enabled it." Richard's face reddened, irritation flashing across his features. "With all due respect, Mrs. Sinclair, this is a business matter. And I'm making it a moral one." Lena stepped forward, her hands resting on the edge of the table, her eyes locked on Richard with unwavering intensity. "Because if you protect people like Jessica, you're complicit. Every passenger who was humiliated. Every person who was made to feel less than human. That's on you. That's on everyone in this room who knew and did nothing." The silence was deafening. Board members shifted uncomfortably, unable to meet her gaze, unable to defend themselves against the truth she'd laid bare. Alexander stood, his voice carrying the weight of finality. "Jessica Hartley is terminated. Effective immediately. And Richard, you're out. I'm buying out your shares." Richard shot to his feet, his face contorting with disbelief and rage. "You can't. I own 87% of this company." Alexander's voice was deadly calm. "I absolutely can." The room erupted in murmurs, but Alexander raised his hand and silence fell again. "This isn't negotiable. This isn't a discussion. This is how things are going to be. And anyone who has a problem with it can join Richard on the way out." No one moved. No one spoke. The message was clear. An hour later, Jessica Hartley was escorted into Alexander's office. She was a wreck, her uniform disheveled, mascara smudged beneath red-rimmed eyes, her hands shaking so violently she had to clasp them together to keep them still. She'd been crying, begging, calling everyone she knew. But her uncle couldn't save her. No one could. "Mr. Sinclair, please," her voice broke, desperation pouring from every syllable. Alexander stood behind his desk, his posture rigid, his expression carved from ice. "You humiliated my wife. But worse than that, you've been doing this to passengers for years. You thought you were untouchable because of your uncle. You were wrong." Jessica sobbed, her body folding in on itself. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean." Yes, you did. Lena stepped forward from where she'd been standing by the window, her voice quiet but razor-sharp. You meant every word. And now you'll live with the consequences. Jessica looked at her, and in her eyes was the desperate hope that another woman might show mercy, might understand, might forgive. But Lena's gaze was steady, unmoved. She had given Jessica a chance to apologize sincerely on the plane. Jessica had offered excuses instead. There would be no second chances. Security appeared in the doorway. Jessica was escorted out, her sobs echoing down the hallway long after she disappeared from view. Weeks passed. The story continued to dominate headlines, but the narrative shifted. Sinclair Aviation Group announced sweeping reforms, mandatory sensitivity training, an independent oversight committee, a hotline for discrimination complaints that bypassed internal HR and went directly to external investigators. Alexander worked 18-hour days restructuring systems that had been broken for years. And Lena worked beside him, not as decoration or support, but as an equal partner, bringing perspective he'd never considered, asking questions that exposed flaws he'd never seen. Then came the press conference. The ballroom was packed with journalists, cameras, industry leaders, and activists who'd fought against airline discrimination for years. Lena stood at the podium, Alexander beside her, and when she spoke, her voice carried across the room with a kind of authority that came not from power or money, but from lived experience and hard-won wisdom. Today, we're announcing the Sinclair Equality Initiative, a program designed to eliminate discrimination in our airline and across the industry. Every complaint will be investigated. Every voice will be heard. And no one will be treated as less than human on our flights. The room erupted in applause, the sound washing over her like a wave. Lena looked at Alexander, and he squeezed her hand, his eyes shining with pride and love and admiration. Later, in the quiet of their car on the way home, he whispered to her, "You changed everything." She smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. "No, we did." Months later, Lena boarded a Sinclair Airlines flight. This time, Alexander and Elijah were with her. This time, everything was different. The crew greeted her warmly, not with the obsequious deference given to someone powerful, but with genuine respect. A young black flight attendant approached, her eyes glistening with tears. She tried to blink away. "Mrs. Sinclair, thank you. You gave people like me hope." Lena pulled her into a hug, holding her the way Gloria had held Lena in that Atlanta kitchen when the world felt too heavy to bear. "You always had it. I just helped you see it." The flight attendant nodded, wiping her eyes, and moved on to assist other passengers. Lena settled into her seat, Elijah asleep in her arms, Alexander beside her reading through reports but stealing glances at his family every few moments as if reassuring himself they were real. As the plane taxied down the runway and lifted into the sky, Lena looked out the window at the world below, tiny cars and buildings and lives unfolding in ways she'd never know. She thought about Tasha Williams, who had taken a settlement and was rebuilding her life. She thought about the dozens of other passengers who had reached out with their own stories, their own pain, their own gratitude. She thought about Jessica Hartley, whose name would forever be attached to shame, and felt not satisfaction but sadness. Sadness that it had come to this, that cruelty had been allowed to flourish until it exploded in such a public, devastating way. She didn't ask to be a symbol. She never wanted her face on news broadcasts or her name in think pieces about race and class and power. But she became one anyway. And somewhere along the way, she'd made peace with it. Because if her pain could prevent someone else's, if her humiliation could spark change, if her voice could amplify the voices of those who'd been silenced, then maybe it had all been worth it. Lena Monroe didn't set out to change the world. She just wanted to visit her mother. But sometimes, the most powerful revolutions start with a single moment of injustice, and a woman brave enough to say, "Not today." Jessica Hartley lost more than her job that day. She lost her illusion of power, her protection, her belief that some people mattered more than others. But Lena? She gained something far greater, the knowledge that her voice mattered, that her dignity was non-negotiable, That she was more than someone's wife, more than someone's mother, more than the assumptions strangers made based on her appearance. And she learned that love, real love, doesn't just protect you. It empowers you to protect others. So the next time someone tries to make you feel small, remember Lena. Remember that you are enough. And no one has the right to tell you otherwise. What would you have done in Lena's position? Let me know. And if this story moved you, share it. Because stories like this need to be told.